Today we come to Revelation chapter 20, and I will just deal with the first 10 verses, because these first 10 verses speak of the Millennial Kingdom, and the Millennial Kingdom has caused more controversy in the church than almost any other topic. Controversy between often good people, right? And therefore, we're going to take it slowly and go through. And let's just first look at the chapter itself, Revelation chapter 20, verses 1 to 10, just 10 verses. Remember, in Revelation 19, we saw the turning point of history, where Christ comes as king, right? And how Satan is totally defeated. His forces are totally defeated, okay? Now, so from this point onwards, though it's just the last 3 chapters of the Bible, I think it's the most critical part. If we don't understand this, then what is the whole story about? What is the whole ending about? Okay? Now, the story tells us John sees an angel coming with a key to the bottomless pit and a massive chain. And John sees the angel bind Satan. He looks so helpless. He can just be bound. Previously, we see Michael, the archangel, fighting with Satan, like a fierce battle going on. That's because God allows those things, all right? Satan is totally, can I underline the word totally helpless if God doesn't allow him to have power. All power comes from God. There's only one source of power, that is God, all right? And no other source of power. People say the sun is the source of power. Madness, all right? The sun's running down. Who gave power to the sun? Can the piece of soil have power of its own? All right? So when God takes away Satan's power, he is more helpless than a baby in diapers, okay? So he's bound up and he's thrown into the bottomless pit so that he cannot deceive the nations for 1,000 years, okay? So how did Satan deceive the nations? We see he uses his agents, and his massive agent throughout history is Babylon. Babylon doesn't mean a city. Babylon is a stereotype or a type of man's dream to have power and possession and to control things for his own benefit, all right? Every city works on that basis. The more power I have, the more money I have, the bigger army I have, the more people I can conquer to serve me, all right? That's exactly the opposite of the character of God. That's the character of Satan, all right? Self-glorification. God's power is in the fact that he has a power to love others. He gave his son gave his life, right? So that's how he has deceived the nations, and we have all fallen into that trap, right? All of us believe that if I have more money, I have more power, I'll be happier, I'll be, more people will serve me, I have more servants, I have more staff, I have more people, I go to a restaurant, flick my finger, people will come, then I'll be happy, right? Lie, deception. He just deceived the nations. People who have all the power in the world are not the happiest people of all at all, right? So for 1,000 years, he's bound so that he cannot deceive the nations, all right? And then after that, John hears that he will be released for a little while, okay? Now, then John sees thrones set up and people seated on the throne, right, having authority. That means they are ruling. Okay, now, how many thrones? I don't know. Maybe many, right? Or maybe many, right? and people seated on the throne. The moment you're seated, it speaks of you settle in a position of power, all right? You only can sit when everything is settled, all right? Then he saw another group, and he said these were those who were martyred for their testimony, that they did not worship the mark of the beast, okay? So there's another group, there's a big group seated on the thrones, and there's another group of resurrected martyrs from the great tribulation, that horrible period that would take place, right? Before this time, many people were killed, during the time when the Antichrist, the false prophet, and Satan were given free rein for a period of time, possibly 7 years, okay? And then he saw these two groups, first big group on the throne, the second group of martyred people from the Great Tribulation, seated and in a position of ruling for 1,000 years as priest of God, right? And then he hears this is called the first resurrection. That means saints who have trusted Christ, resurrected to rule on the thrones, and then martyrs from the Great Tribulation, martyrs killed, resurrected to be part of this ruling in this millennial kingdom for 1,000 years. The word millennial, milli, 1,000, annum, annual, millennial, all right? Annual means years, 1,000-year reign, okay? So this period they were ruled is called the millennial reign or millennial kingdom, okay? So they are part of the first resurrection, resurrected bodies, they're dead, resurrected in their new bodies to rule for 1,000 years. Then he hears that the rest of the dead are not resurrected, okay? That means those who didn't trust Christ are not resurrected until the 1,000 years later. After the end of the millennium, there will be another resurrection. So there are two resurrections. The first one of believers and martyrs resurrected so they can be part of the millennial kingdom. The rest still left in that place, that waiting room, so to speak, for the next resurrection, second resurrection, when they will rise to face another judgment. We will read that later in Revelation 20, the great white throne judgment, all right? So they are not judged for 1,000 years left in the waiting room, okay, of the deceased. Now, then in Revelation chapter 20, after 1,000 years, Satan is released for a little while, and in that little while, he manages to deceive a huge number of people, described as like the sand of the sea. Who are these people? These are people born during the millennium. You say, how come? I thought resurrected bodies don't get married and all that, right? The resurrected ones don't. But there were survivors, Jewish survivors during the Great Tribulation who didn't die in the Great Tribulation, entered this, right? There were others, Gentile survivors, right, who didn't die in the Great Tribulation, allowed to enter into the millennial kingdom, and they produced babies, right? So these were the ones in their natural body, like our body now. So they married, they reproduced, and there's a massive number of people, right, in the millennial kingdom who were given 1,000 years, or many of them, maybe the last part, maybe less, but they saw the beautiful reign of the millennial kingdom, which we will describe in the next section. How wonderful the reign is, no environment of sin, no deception of Satan, everything was beautiful. And yet when Satan comes for a short while and encourages them to rebel against Jesus Christ and his delegated rulers, the saints and the martyrs, they follow Satan. How many? Few? No. Like the sand of the sea. A huge multitude follow Satan, all right? And then they are called the forces of Gog, G-O-G, and Magog, M-A-G-O-G. This is a name given in Ezekiel chapter 38 to speak of the Gog and Magog, speak of the archetype, all right, the type. Just like Babylon speaks a type of a city, it doesn't describe one city, it's a type, right? Gog and Magog speaks of the rebellious heart of men who want to rebel against authority. Just don't want to be self-rule themselves, okay? So Satan says, why do you let Jesus rule you? And then he deceives these people, and then they gather together for the last battle. And interestingly, Armageddon is not the last battle, right? Armageddon was before this, before when Jesus came, Revelation chapter 18 and so on, okay? But this is another battle after the millennium, 1,000 years later, okay? At least 1,000 years later, another battle. They all gather to attack the city where Jesus is sitting, is Jerusalem in the Millennial Kingdom. This Jerusalem in the Millennial Kingdom, restored Jerusalem, not the new Jerusalem. And then they try to attack it, and then the battle is just like the Battle of Armageddon. It's a non-battle, okay? Anyone who wants to fight with God and expects a battle is a moron, right? M-O-R-O-N, too stupid to describe. His ego is so big, his stupidity, all right, is also so big, all right? But his ego is bigger than his big stupidity. And then fire comes down from heaven, and it's over in a flash. And this time, Satan's not bound in the bottomless pit. Satan is sent to the lake of fire to be tormented forever and ever. That's another word for hell. Satan is thrown to hell. So those who don't like Jesus can enjoy Satan in hell, all right? The moron, right? The deceiver, right? Who's so egoistical, so powerfully egoistical that he's so stupid too, he doesn't know he can't fight God. We know people like presidents of the world who think they are so smart, though nobody thinks they're smart, all right? But the ego is so big, they blind themselves, okay? And so he's sent to hell to join the Antichrist and the false prophet forever and ever. So what I've done is paraphrase Revelation chapter 22, verses 1 to 10. So there's not a lot of events here that you see, not a lot of events. Actually, if you just see the events, it's basically Satan is bound, saints rule, right, for 1,000 years, and then saints and Jesus, of course, saints under Jesus rule, and then Satan's released. Basically, that's the three events that I have just described to you, the three major events, right? And then the consequences of these three events. So this is what we would now have to move on to the controversial subject of the millennial kingdom.